Hey peeps, it's LaVeeda from What Can't LaVeeda Do. In today's video, I'm going to show you how I copied my favorite store-bought dress. Well, my favorite summer store-bought dress. And by copying, I mean I duplicated it. I made a pattern from it and made a dress from that pattern. So this will be a two-part video. Part 1, I'll be showing you how I actually copied the dress and made the pattern. Part 2 of the video, I will show you how I actually sew the pieces together. So if you're intrigued, stay tuned. Okay peeps, we're in my sewing room and this is my cutting table. On my cutting table I have one of these plastic mats, ruler mats, but I'm not going to use this mat to do what I need to do, but instead I'm going to use my cardboard cutting table, the one that I use if I'm on the living room floor or if I'm in my bedroom. And I'm using this because, as you will see in the video, I'll be pinning my dress down to the tracing paper, and by pinning, the pins will go through this cardboard and leave little prick holes, and those holes will be the outline of the actual dress that you can just trace right on over. So let me unfold this, and that's actually it extends beyond my cutting table, but I have one more fold that I'm going to leave folded for right now. Okay, so that's the cardboard. So next, I'm going to lay down my tracing paper. And you can actually use newspaper. You can go to the dollar store and get some, you can get some of the, let me show you. You can get some of this postal paper. And by postal, I mean you can wrap things up in this, put an address on it, put a stamp on it, and ship it wherever. You can use this. You can also use wrapping paper. And I'm out of this, so I have to open up another roll. But this may do, since I'll be making a shorter dress of the actual original. So at the beginning of the video, I showed you the original dress and my new dress that I made from that. So in this video, I'm going to make a knee-length dress using the same dress. So what I'm going to do now, I'm just going to take some stick pins and pin down the edges of the paper so it won't curl up and move on me. Okay, so this is my existing dress, my store-bought dress. And so what I want to do now is that I want to fold this in half. As you can see, if I have the dress out, stretched out completely, it extends beyond the tracing paper. At that point, I can tape additional paper to this tracing paper to make it wider. So I'm only going to make a pattern for half the dress, just in case you get fabric that's 45 inches wide. In that case, this dress will extend beyond that fabric. So if you fold the dress in half and make a pattern from that, you can use 45-inch wide fabric or 60 inch wide fabric. So what I'm going to do now, I'm folding the dress in half, seam to seam, side seam to side seam, all the way up, and I want to make it as smooth as possible. And so as I do that, I'm actually going to pin at the hemline so it stays together. So I'm going to take my stick pins and just pin along the hem so that it doesn't shift as I straighten the dress above. Okay, let's slide it down. Again, seam line or side seam to side seam and straighten out. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to actually pick it up and shake it so that it falls into place. There we go. Much better. So again, you want it as smooth and wrinkle free as possible. And this is a stretch jersey fabric, by the way. So I'm pinning the folds into place. You slide it down and work on the rest. You're not going to believe how easy this is. And if this is your first time, start out with something easy, like a straight dress, an A-line skirt, and then venture on into pants and button-down shirts. So again, I'm pinning in place. So you can't see. Let me bring it down so you can see. I'm going to pin in place. And once you get to this point, don't worry about the sleeves, because we're going to do that section separately. But up until the underarm seam, you want to pin that together and make sure all of that is straight. So now I'm going to pin the shoulder seams together. And we're all set. So now, this seam right here is your center front. That fold is your center front. From the front, the top of your neck, all the way down. So you want to put that on the edge of the tracing paper. So make sure it's right on the edge. And then we're going to start pinning in place along the center front fold. So I'm not pinning to the board right now. I'm just pinning the dress to the tracing paper. Okay, do the same for the side seam. You're going to pin the dress to the tracing paper. once you get up to the underarm area or the waist and the upper arm, make sure you're stretching the dress out to get out all of the wrinkles and folds. Okay, now let me slide it down. Hopefully you'll be able to see. If not, I'll take the camera off the tripod so you can get a closer look. So up here by the underarm or the armhole, what I'm going to do is I'm going to stick a pin maybe a 1/2 inch or inch apart along this armhole line. That way we can get that armhole shape. So at this point I'm sticking the pins vertically through the cardboard cutting mat so that it leaves little indentions. And now we're going to pin down this neckline. Okay. Okay, I'm going to take the camera off the tripod so you can get a closer look of this pinning here. So hold on. Okay, so this is the top of the dress. This is the sleeve. And you see the pins standing up vertically along the armhole. That's exactly what you want. And so underneath of it you'll see little prick holes, like I said, that you can trace to get the accurate shape of the armhole. So I had to remove the pins and drag everything up onto the cutting board, so you may see multiple rows of holes once I take the dress off. But you can see the pins. Okay, so now we're going to do some tracing. Okay, so we have our dress pinned to the tracing paper. So now we need to add seam allowance. So I'm going to add a 1/2 inch, no, 5/8 inch seam allowance. So again, I'm adding 5/8 inch seam allowance. So what you want to do is you want to set your seam gauge to 5/8 and use this guide as your guide when marking your seam allowance. So I can't move because this is pinned, so I'm going to start up here. Again, I'm going to take the camera off the tripod so you can see exactly what I'm doing. So I'm putting this pink bar right on the seam of my dress and making a mark 5/8 inches from that seam line. So this will be the extra room that you need once you sew the dress together. Because if you don't add extra seam allowance and just sew, just cut and sew, it'll be too tight. So always add seam allowance when you're duplicating a garment. So I'm going to add 5/8 inch all the way up. I'm going to skip the armhole for right now. We're not going to add the seam allowance until we remove the dress. So once I take the pins out and remove the dress, that's when I'll add the seam allowance to the armhole. So let's add the seam allowance to the shoulder and the neckline. Okay, now I'm going to take a Sharpie and draw over my line so that you can see it more clearly. So I'm just going to freehand it. And you don't have to be perfect. Don't concern yourself with being so perfect when you're doing this. The thing about stretch jersey is that it's very forgiving. It clings to your body and it drapes well. So just take your time and connect the lines. Okay, I'm finished tracing my line. So also what I want to do, I want to make this pattern a shorter dress. Like I said earlier, I want to make this one a knee length. So I want to take 15 inches from the hemline. So I'm going to measure that out now. And my 15 inches is right here. Okay, so let me remove the camera from the tripod so you can see the seam allowance. Hold on. Okay, so we're getting a good look at the 5/8 inch seam allowance that I added to the edge of my dress. Now this mark right here is the mark that I will cut my dress. So this will be a knee length dress. So that black line again is the seam allowance that I just added to the dress. I'm sorry. So that's the armhole steel pin. We're going to do that next. But there's the 5/8 inch extra seam allowance that I added to the shoulder seam and to the neckline. So this, what you're looking at now, is the back neckline. That neckline is going to be a little higher than your front neckline. So I'll show you how to do that in just a moment. Okay, so we're going to unpin the dress from the tracing paper and unpin it completely at this point from itself and the tracing paper, because we're pretty much done. Okay, and that's the outline of our dress, with the exception of that armhole. So let me bring you closer. I don't think you'll be able to see the pricks, but let's see. Okay, hold on. Okay, so we at the armhole. So let me see if you can see the little hole. Yes, you can see. Can you see? Uh-oh. There we go. See the little pricks? So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to use my curved ruler. And I don't necessarily need to use my curved ruler. I can just follow the pricks from the stick pins. So I'm going to follow the pricks from the stick pins with my black Sharpie. And let me reposition the camera so you can actually see me doing that. So hold on. Okay, so I'm going to follow the pricks to draw this armhole. So let's go this way. You just literally connecting the dots. And there you have it. So we're going to go ahead and mark. First thing I want to do is I want to cut off the 15 inches down here. So let me measure my mark. This is, I'm going to draw a straight line across here, and then I'm going to cut this bottom part off. What we want to do, we want to label the pattern, so that's very important. So we're going to say this is the back. We want to cut one piece of fabric on the fold of the fabric. So just cut one on fold. Now we'll explain that in a second video. We want to put today's date, which is July the 20th, 2019. And then we want to also make a note that this pattern was copied from a store-bought pattern. So this pattern was traced from my store-bought dress. And you also want to put on there what type of fabric to use. That's very important because you cannot use a pattern that was made from jersey fabric, which is very stretchy, for a woven fabric which has no stretch at all. So we're going to put 4-way stretch jersey fabric. And we also want to include the seam allowance that we added, which was 5/8 inches. 5/8 inch seam allowance. Okay, so we have all the important information. This is a back piece. And we know it's a back piece because the neckline is really high. So it's a back piece. We want to cut one on the fold. We have the date that we created this pattern. We have a note that we made this pattern from a store-bought pattern. We listed the type of fabric to use for this pattern. And we also included the seam allowance that we added. So now I'm going to cut this out and I'm going to trace it. No, before I cut it out, I'm going to trace it so that we can have a front pattern. So hold on. Let me unpackage some new tracing paper since I ran out of this one. So hold on. Okay, so I got a new roll of tracing paper. So what I'm going to do is make sure that this pattern here is aligned to one of the straight lines on this cutting board. So let me pin into place. There's some key areas. And now we're going to put tracing paper over top of this pattern. Making sure that the straight edge of this paper is in alignment with the paper on the bottom. And just pin it down. Okay, now everything is pinned into place. And what I want to do now is trace the back pattern out as soon as I find my Sharpie. Oh, here we go. So with a steady hand, trace the pattern on the bottom. And if your hand is not too steady, get a ruler. And just take your time. There's no rush. Let me move this pin out the way. And now we trace the hemline. Okay, so now only thing left to do with this front piece is to draw in the front neckline. So we're going to take the dress and I'm going to fold it the other way so that we can see the front neckline. Make sure everything is straight. And I'm just going to pin it down so it won't move. So we're going to take two measurements here. We're going to measure the distance between where we want our neckline to stop to the back neck edge. So that measurement is, I guess you would call this the depth. This measurement is 6.5 inches. So we're going to take our tape measurement, put it up against the back neckline, and we're going to make a mark 6.5 inches. So now we need to determine this curve of the neckline. So that's when the curve ruler comes in handy. And if you don't have a curve ruler, and this is a curve ruler, if you don't have one of these, just wing it, just freestyle it. And freestyle it, you will, I'm going to need to bring this down so you can see. I'll show you in a second, but let's just measure this curve. So this curve, I'm going to put the ruler at a point where it mimics, it's an exact curve of the store-bought dress. Okay, so I have the 0 at the neck edge, right between the breasts, and the shoulder seam is at a 9. So I want to put the 0 right on this edge. And the 9 needs to be right on the shoulder seam. And you just trace it. So let me move this dress. Let me shift everything down so you can see. So this is the new neck. This is the neck edge for the front. And like I said, if you don't have a ruler, a curved ruler, what you would do, you would start at the neck shoulder seam that's right on the side of your neck, and to the 6.5 inch mark that we measured earlier, and just freestyle it. Just connect those, just connecting lines by making little small strokes. And once you get towards the chest, you just want to curve it so that that 6.5 inch mark meets up with that curved line. That's all. So now, that's all we had to do with the front pattern piece. So now we want to label it just like we labeled the back piece. So we want to say this is the front, and everything is going to be exactly the same with the exception of adding the front. So this is the front piece. We want to cut 1 on the fold. We want today's date, June 20th, 2019. We want to make a note that this dress was, this pattern was traced from a store-bought pattern. This pattern was traced from my store-bought dress. We want to list what type of fabric to use this pattern for. For 4-way stretch jersey fabric. And we also want to include the seam allowance that we added, which was 5/8 inches. And that's it. So now we're going to cut those pieces out. And cut just outside of your tracing line so that when you place this pattern against fabric, your edges won't blend with the fabric, especially if you use a white fabric. You won't know where the edge of your pattern is. So just cut right outside of your black line. And you see how the pattern just curled up? What you can do is turn your iron on a low setting, turn the steam off, and just press your pattern piece flat. That will solve that problem. Okay, that's the front piece. Now let's cut out this back piece. Okay. So we got our front and we got our back pattern pieces. And it's a mirror image of one another. It's a mirror image of one another with the exception of the neckline. The front neckline is lower. The back neckline is higher. So now let's make the sleeve pattern. So we're going to take a piece of the cut off tracing paper we just used and we're going to fold it in half. And we're going to fold it in half because we're only making half of the sleeve. And then once we fold the pattern out, it'll be the full sleeve. So you'll see in a minute. I know it's a little confusing, but you'll get it. Okay, so gonna make sure the sleeve is nice and wrinkle free. And I'm going to pin straight down to the pattern paper. Uh-oh, sorry, it's not focused. Oh, there we go. So I'm pinning, I'm pinning the sleeve to the pattern paper. Let me cut off this extra. So let me start at the bottom here, so make sure we have enough paper. There we go. Stretch the fabric out and make it as smooth as possible. And then pin in the center so it won't shift. And just like we did for the dress, we're going to stick pins vertically along the armhole through the cutting mat so that it leaves the little prick holes that we're going to later trace. You know what? Sorry. Okay, so I folded the tracing paper in half and the fold is right here. So I'm going to put the pin cushion right there. I'm going to put the fold of the sleeve right along the fold of the tracing paper. Let me turn it around so this is the fold closest to you. Put the dress up here. So I want the fold of the sleeve to be aligned with the fold of the tracing paper, because later we're going to fold the paper out and you're going to have a full sleeve. Okay, make sure everything is nice and smooth. And I'm pinning the sleeve right to the fold of the tracing paper. And now, let's smooth the hemline and pin. Okay, I'm going to put a pin in the center. And now, just like we did earlier, we're going to put pins vertically right along the shape of the armhole so that we'll later be able to trace those prick holes that we'll be making. So pin right through the cardboard. Okay, now we're going to trace the perimeter of the sleeve. Oh, first we're going to add seam allowance. So again, we're going to add 5/8 inch seam allowance. Okay, now I'm going to take my Sharpie and draw over my lines. Okay, now I'm going to unpin. Remove the dress, and now we find our holes and trace right over the prick lines or the dots. And if you have to, just go one dot at a time because it's a little difficult to see. And that's also the benefit of putting the pins close together, like a 1/2 inch apart. Okay, I'm going to smooth out this hemline here of the sleeve. And you can make this sleeve as long or as short as you want. So now I'm going to cut it with this still folded. So right now you see a 1/2 sleeve. So I'm going to cut right on the outside of my black line. And this is also called the cutting line. That's the proper term for it. But I'm sure you already know that. Okay, now you fold it out and you have a full sleeve. So just like the front and the back pieces, we're going to mark what this is. So this is a sleeve. And we want to cut 2 of these since we have 2 arms, right? So cut 2. Put today's date, 7/20/2019. A note that this pattern was copied from my store bought dress, and for 4-way stretch knit fabric, and we added 5/8 inch seam allowance. Guess what, y'all? That's it. You have just created, let me clear this. You have just created a pattern from your store-bought dress. Or at least I just created a pattern from a store-bought dress. We have a back piece, we have a front piece, and we have a sleeve. So I know some of you may be wondering why I didn't do this directly on the fabric that I'm going to actually use. And I'm going to tell you why. You make a pattern so that you won't have to go through what we just went through each and every time you want to duplicate that dress. You make a pattern once and you can use it a million times until it rips. That's why we created a pattern. So let me show you the fabric that I'm going to use to make this dress with. That's the fabric. So in part 2 of this video, we will actually make the dress. We're going to cut this fabric out and sew it together. Thank y'all so much for watching. You hear my birds? Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate you. I love you. And if you like what you saw, please give me a thumbs up. Please leave a nice comment, questions you may have, suggestions you may have, tips you may have. I'm open to all that. So until next time, happy sewing and live your best life.